that just came down.
All right, so earlier today, Mike Craven, who writes for Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine, which is very much high school football, but also very much college football. I had a chance. He was on his way to College Station to visit with him about the Dave Aranda story and more. Mike Craven, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine. David Smoak, 365 Sports. Mike, what was your reaction when you saw where Baylor was going to retain Dave Aranda moving forward?
I was surprised. Three losing seasons in 4 years. The way that they played down the stretch, just with the fan reactions on social media and just the mood around the program. If I was a betting man, I would have had them making a change. But I had heard for a long time behind the scenes that they didn't want to make one, and this was the more likely destination. So I shouldn't have been surprised. But I think with just the way modern college football is, you just expect to see one after a season like that. But they're rolling with their guy, and it sounds like Matt Rhodes believes Dave Aranda is the guy that can turn this thing around.
Do you believe that what we're being told, even last week, the NIL increase, offensive changes, offensive coordinator, do you believe that it's enough? That it can just change who they've been for the last 3 to 4 years?
I think it can. I don't know if it will, but I definitely think it can. I think one of the advantages to modern college football, despite all the ills that we talk about all the time, is you can turn over a roster pretty quickly. We've seen that at a few other places in the country. So if he can get a couple defensive playmakers in there and get the offense figured out with the new OC, who I'd imagine would have his connections to some players as well, I do think that in the new look Big 12, without Texas, without Oklahoma, that there is a route back to the top in the way that they made that change from 2020 to 2021. One of the things I like about Dave is he's somebody who's introspective and doesn't mind changing things up. Like, he knows he messed up with the portal and he went in a different direction there. I think he knows that he needs to be more involved with NIL, and they're going to make a change there. We'll have to see if it's enough to make a difference, but I do think in today's world you can make a year-to-year turnaround quicker than ever before.
As an AD, Mac Rhodes, the easiest thing he could have done was fire Dave. Move on. Everybody would have been happy just because there's a change. How unique is it in this day and age you've discussed that, well, yesterday they were another handful of coaches who were fired, and at Baylor they're going to remain patient?
Yeah, I think it's truly an outlier, right? I mean, Houston fired a coach who won 12 games 2 years ago as well. He won 8 games last year, and then he didn't have a good year as a brand new member of the Big 12. And they paid him about $15 million to go away. And so, I think one of the things here is it speaks to how much likability helps keep guys around. Like, if you didn't like working with Dave Aranda probably is not there anymore. I don't know if people like working with Dana Holgorsen, so Dana Holgorsen's not there anymore. It's a lesson to all of us that if you're pleasant, if you're a good person, if people like working with you, you tend to get a little bit more grace than you would otherwise.
Should that be a reason to keep him, or is that just one reason at least to look for another reason to keep him?
I think it's the reason to look for another reason to keep him, right? You like him, you like what he's doing, you like the fit he is at your university. Remember, this isn't a big public school, right? This is a private Christian university. There's some stuff that goes on with that. Dave's the perfect fit there. I think the biggest part of this is that Dave Aranda is going to be the defensive coordinator. He is unquestionably one of the 5 to 10 best defensive minds in college football and has been for a long time. If he's calling that defense and that defense gets back to being closer to 2021, all of a sudden, if the Baylor offense can score 30 points a game, this is a 9-3, 10-2 football team again with the schedule and the way it looks next year. So they're banking on Dave Aranda, the defensive mind, I believe, as much as they are Dave Aranda, the head coach.
I've heard, and Mac has told us this before, that he's still continuing to learn about or becoming a better head coach. With him spending more time there, that means less time perhaps as a head coach. How critical, then, is the hire of the offensive coordinator with that kind of experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, this offensive coordinator hire is going to determine if Dave Aranda is the head coach at Baylor for 2024 or if Dave Aranda is the head coach at Baylor for beyond that, right? So it is the most important hire of his tenure. He has to get this right, and because he's going back to being the play caller on defense. It's going to be a guy who's been a head coach before. I mean, you would know this more than me, but it always felt like during the Art Briles era, Art Briles was the head coach of offense, and Phil Bennett was the head coach of defense. I think this is going to mirror something like that, but with Dave on defense and whoever they hire offensively kind of being the guy, the figurehead on that side of the ball.
One other note, Mike Craven, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine. Mike Elko introduced at A&M. You mentioned Houston. There's a couple of other jobs that also opened. It almost was Kentucky, but that didn't happen. How sloppy was the A&M search, and in the end, did they get who they should have hired in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, the second question, I believe, is pretty easy. I do think Mike Elko was the perfect fit. You know, Jimbo Fisher was 34-12 when Elko was his defensive coordinator at A&M. He was 12-12 when Elko wasn't his defensive coordinator. I think bringing in a guy who can keep a lot of that roster intact will help for 2024 because, let's face it, A&M wants to beat Texas next year. They didn't want to reset completely and lose the whole roster. They wanted to hire somebody that can keep a lot of those guys around and give them a chance to be competitive right away. But it was no doubt sloppy. You know, I think Texas has had this problem. A&M clearly has this problem. It is nice to have a bunch of people who give a lot of money. The downside is when you give that amount of money, you feel like you have an opinion. They have so many opinions in the room, it's hard to come to a consensus. Mark Stoops obviously was not a guy that they felt comfortable with, and it had a lot of egg on their face. And so, yeah, I think Mike Elko is facing a tough job. It was always going to look bad when you replace a guy who just got paid $76 million to go away. But the way they handled this coaching search, he's under a lot of pressure to win and win right away.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your time. Mike Craven, Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine, 365 Sports.
In our logo and